So good evening. My name is Grace Law, and I'm professor and chair of the Department of Architecture here at the GSD and principal of La Dolmen. A quick reminder that we have live captioning, and to click the icon on the screen, and for those joining us, of course, you can also hear in person, scan the code. Please visit the booth in the back should you have any questions. So upcoming at the GSD in our public programs, I'll just give you a few notes about things that are happening next week. On February 17th, please join us for a lecture by Anthony Dunn and Fiona Rabi of Dunn and Rabi. They're authors of Speculative Everything and most recently, Not Here, Not Now. And then on February 18th, in the Positions series, it features our own GSD, Angela Pang, assistant professor in practice, and she's also the founder of Pang Architect. So, and for more information about these upcoming events, please visit the GSD's website. So tonight we have the great pleasure of receiving Fabrizio Barozzi and Alberto Veiga. I've always wanted to say that my whole life. And this is, as this semester's John C. Portman Design Critics in Architecture. This position honors John Portman, an architect whose iconic buildings and cityscapes have redefined the urban environment, and we are very grateful for this generosity. Fabrizio and Alberto are joining us this semester from Barcelona, where they founded their eponymous firm, Barozzi Veiga. This is in 2004. We're also very grateful for the long history of architects from Spain contributing to the culture of the GSD and of Harvard altogether. I could even say that I'm personally indebted to the vagaries of Spanish politics because, ironically, it was the Franco dictatorship, which lasted from 1939 to 1975, that led José Luis Sert to come to Cambridge and becoming dean of the GSD in 1952, and then designing several projects at Harvard, including Peabody Terrace. And now that's a building I look onto and enjoy critiquing with my morning coffee. So a generation of Spanish architects from the post-Franco period then shaped the GSD's Department of Architecture. So of course, Sert from Barcelona was later followed by Rafael Moneo from Madrid. Other Spanish architects such as Miralles and Pinos from Barcelona taught Option Studios, and Iñaki Abalos from Madrid chaired the department when I arrived at Harvard in 2013. And then we also have Jean Busquets from Barcelona. So while Madrid is our minister, Barcelona is our muse. And so we are really thrilled to have this relationship continuing with other wonderful faculty from Spain, and it's just too many to name, and now, of course, with Barozzi Veiga. Barozzi Veiga combines, respectively, a theoretical education from northern Italy and a highly technical training from northern Spain. So through their emergence caught the tail end of Spain's booming economy before the 2008 global collapse, they began as outsiders to the local architectural scene in Barcelona. And this meant that they were pursuing international competitions from the outset. The firm's oeuvre thus combines Spain's post-Franco cosmopolitanism with contemporary European oscillations between technical and humanist traditions. In projects across Europe and beyond, their buildings respond precisely to specific places while retaining a robust and coherent sense of formal autonomy and identity. Visually, their buildings have undeniable impact. Primary geometries of almost lithic, Platonic forms register clearly against the landscapes and cities in which they are set, standing in dynamic tension with their surroundings. Though their architecture is not minimalist, it uses fundamental enduring tools, proportion, materiality, light, and color to synthesize, distill, and reveal many contextual, material, and cultural forces. A decade ago, Fabrizio and Alberto called this approach sentimental monumentality, which explores how monumental architecture increases one's awareness of a place. In their installation with that same title in 2016 at the Venice Biennale, the insertion of a single concrete column in the Arsenales Corderi building freely asserts a reflexive design language within the existing rows of masonry columns, presenting an architectural dialogue that makes the historic structure palpably visible. This earlier conceptual thinking weaves into their recent work. In the Szczecin Philharmonic Hall in Poland, the building presents a forest of white spires within a tree-lined block. The Abby Kortrijk in Belgium restores a historic monastic complex while imposing an additionally unmistakably contemporary architectural structure. The Oolite Arts in Miami, their first project in the US, sets an introverted citadel of the arts into the cityscape as a mini San Gimignano of rectangular minarets. So this sensitivity to place extends to include what Barozzi Veiga described, borrowing from Miguel de Unamuno as the intrahistoria, another word I've always been dying to say, or the minor stories and fragments that quietly shape the character of a site. Barozzi Veiga's work preserves history by tapping into latent narratives that highlight a place's persistent and evolving uniqueness. Their option studio this semester, Civic Ground, the architecture of urban repair, directly engages these themes, confronting Barcelona's Vallcarca neighborhood, asking how architecture might intervene without erasing ambiguity or imposing a generic order. Now, their approach makes an essential contribution in today's digital age, where the overabundance of visual imagery now risks homogenizing architectural expression as forms quickly replicate across the globe. In response, our discipline has developed a seemingly insatiable demand for originality. Simultaneously, architects must engage with existing specific heterogeneous environments that require deliberate, unique negotiations. So Barozzi Veiga's work offers elegant, firm responses to these contemporary tensions, testing the potential that their ideational renderings can indeed produce actual buildings of sculptural heroic figuration. Recognized with numerous accolades, including the RIBA Award for International Excellence, the Design Vanguard Award, the Mies van der Rohe Award, for which they are nominated again this year, demonstrates that architecture can resist both homogenization and spectacle by remaining rigorously specific and deeply contextual, while still aspiring toward a timeless, consequential abstraction. Please join me in welcoming Fabrizio Barozzi and Alberto Veiga. Fabrizio, to the stage. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's really a great privilege to be here tonight with you to present some of our works. Thank you, Grace, for the wonderful introduction. Very precise, very very clear, and thank you also for us to give the opportunity to Alberto and to me to have a studio here in Harvard. We made quite a lot of lecture during the last 20 years, but tonight is really for us a kind of very special moment. No, it's let's say how I can articulate a little bit some thought to give you a clear understanding of what we have done during the last year. I will address the lecture. Later, Alberto will have a dialogue with you to clarify some thematic that can appear during the presentation. It's very happy to see you so numerous here tonight. I confess that I am a little bit nervous also. And please be patient with my English. You know, I'm Italian. After 20 years living in Spain, I start to have problem with my Italian. So imagine with the English, no? So anyway, let's say tonight the title of the lecture is Permanence and Transformation. Why we use this title is because essentially since we started our office more than 20 years ago, the majority of our projects has been extension, addition, or transformations. No, when we try to work in this with this type of project, we always strive to find a sense of permanence within the context. We try to, let's say, to discover which are the identitary element of a place that make that place very specific, very unique. No? And using this type of reading, I like it very much, this idea of the infrahistoria or the minor history, to find what are really the elements that characterize a place, and reuse this element to create a new narrative for the project. So our project really always try to find a balance between the specificity of a place and the autonomy of the form. We continue to move between, let's say, contextualism and abstraction. We want to create architecture very, very specific for a place that's able to emphasize the uniqueness of every place. But at the same time, we are very conscious that architecture is a discipline, has its own story, its own history in some way, and an object, an architecture, has a value as an object by itself. No, so as a certain internal autonomy in some way. So all our work are based in this dichotomy between specificity and autonomy. At the very end, our architecture tried to reject a generic architecture, but emphasize the uniqueness of the different places. Maybe if you can start to put the timer, so I will not go longer, will very helpful. So this is sketches of our very, very first project, an extension of a medieval building in Roa. And we try to really create a new microcosm in which new architecture and historical elements are able to create a new scenario. They are blended together, and in this building, we really try to give this sense of belonging, this sense of to make a building which is permanent in this size, but at the same time, it's has its own independence, its own autonomy. In this project, the idea was to deal with the atmosphere of that place in the north of Madrid, with the unique atmosphere of that place, with the time, with the slow time of this area. And this image is a kind of manifesto also for us. In the middle of a private building, there is a public space. The architecture is just the frame of the urban. This is an idea that going across all our projects. we try to give a sense of continuity with the place. This idea, this notion, the idea of continuity is absolutely crucial for us. In the north of Poland, in Szczecin, the Philharmonic tried to be, working continuity with the urban form of that places. All the elements that conform the Philharmonic are already present in the historical building that you see on the site of the Philharmonic: verticality, mass, stepped roof. In some way, many occasions we work by analogy. We try to steal elements that already exist, give a new, a new story to them. This idea of continuity or work with the specificity is present also in the interior. The concert hall is something that is a new step in the tradition of the concert hall of the east of Europe. More recently, in a small fine art museum in Switzerland, we elaborate this idea of continuity in a more subtle way. When we speak about a context, a reality, there's not just one reality. A place is conformed by multiple reality. There is a physical reality, there's an imaginary reality, there's a climatic reality. This is also an ideal, let's say, reality between the places. In this case, this relationship with the pre-existing building that you see on the left is more subtle, is related with the archetype that, with the ideal form they organize the historical building, a neo-Palladian building, and are transformed and exported in the new extension. Or even in another project in Zurich for the Tanzhaus, the architecture tried to interpret the character of that place. Is conceived as a kind of cultural infrastructure. It deals with this industrial atmosphere of this place. So this quick introduction with some project we made years ago, it gives you really a sense that every project in some way it's very specific for its sites. It tries to work in continuity with the place, but at the same time, let's how to say, be able to discover a new possible reality for the place, for that place. This sense of belonging, this sense of working in continuity with a story, with a tradition, with atmosphere, it really, let's say, the common statement for all of our project. And for tonight, I will present you more in detail 5 projects more recently that continues to evolve this theoretical approach of our project. Years ago, we finalized the Fine Art Museum in Lausanne. It's a pretty, let's say, a big building located in the city center of Lausanne, in this area here, like here. So the site of a project is pretty big, is more than 2 hectares, and as you can see, it's full of building related with the maintenance of the train, etc., etc. And if you notice here, there was one building of 1911 without any special interest, but was kind of the most, let's say, interesting element of this area. The project was about to create not only the Fine Art Museum, but to create a new district for art, in which to locate the 3 major museums of the city: fine arts, photography, and design. So this was the initial situation, a very big place related with the train station and the plaza in front of the train station. So at some point we thought we tried to transform, to reorganize this series of buildings. But as I say at the beginning, at some point we realized that instead of just transforming, was really important first to find a urban strategy that permit to solve all these complex, let's say, urban situation. So, and if in some sketches, initial sketches, you notice that our attention is not really in the building, but it's more located in this central void. So, and when we realized that to create public space, to create a urban connection with the city were even more important than just try to transform certain element, the strategy arrived very easily. The building, the three new museums mark the frame of this new public space related with the plaza in front of the street. The idea of preservation in some way in this project pass by not only an integral preservation of things, but it's drive by a preservation of different fragments, a constellation of elements that can give back the memory of the place. We reuse fragments of the floor, we transform the arcade, we keep some element of the pre-existing situation. And this element became really the capital element for the new project. And once we defined this strategy, this urban strategy, the architecture later arrived very easily. The museum is just an inhabited wall that divide the new public space from the train, from the railways. And this, and the building, in some ways, let's say, just a kind of container for art. So, and again, this is what we intend to find this balance between the specificity of a place and the autonomy of the form. This is really a building very specific for this place. It starts to work in continuity with this industrial atmosphere of this area, with the materiality of this place, but at the same time, it's a very abstract element that has internally its own rule, its own let's say, geometry and story. We always try find this balance. But again, what is really important in this image is not only the building. For sure, the building is important. It's this kind of enigmatical, a little bit enigmatical building, but it is the core is this new public space that is able to link all this area with the city. Again, the architecture is the frame of the urban. So this idea of preservation, as I told you before, passed through the preservation of fragment. A small element of the historical building became really the protagonist of the new museum. The museum is just a neutral background in which stand out this fragment of the pre-existing building. It's the possibility also to give continuity with the story of this place. From towards the train, the building is very opaque, also for a security reason and preserving the art. From the other part, the building, it's apparently very hermetic, but in reality, it's very, very porous, very, very open, especially in the ground floor and the upper floor. This facade, this element, essentially is a brise-soleil that filter the northern light into the building. The ground floor is just the extension of the urban inside of the building. And if you notice, this small element of the pre-existing building became the central compositive element of the entire proposal. The new foyer is set on this element, and then the building is very pragmatic. It's just a sequence of chords dividing the space. So you enter through this porch, through this compression, and you discover the new foyer linked with this element of the pre-existing building. And again, the these beautiful arched windows facing south, that was probably the most emotional element of the historical building. It's transformed into the new the new principal compositive element of the new space. It's again, it's another image that transmits the idea of what means for us this idea of working continuity with something. It's work by analogy. It's work preserving things, transforming things, give new meaning to elements that already exist. We never conceive our projects as a kind of tabula rasa, but we strive really to be just a small step inside of a bigger story in some way. These are some other images of the foyer, the stairs that move around and go in the upper floors, the mineral materiality that appears behind the northern facade that filter the light into the spaces. Our building tried to be very simple, very precise. This is a kind of complex museum, pretty big. It's more than 150 meters long, but it's solved just by a sequence of few cores that really permit to organize the exhibition area, permit to having the visitor a loop inside. So we try to always solve a complex situation through very simple things. In the master plan was the same. Apparently, the organization of the three volume was very simple, very obvious, but it has a very strong organization that permit to solve the complexity of that size with just a few movements. The museum is pretty clear. Several levels is characterized by the upper level with zenithal light. This is a very big room in which the roof appears is very light, suspended above the exhibition areas. The building is entirely made by brick. It's like an old fabric in some way. No? Also, it is really important to use the materiality in order to emphasize this intimate relationship with the context, with the atmosphere of the context. The concrete create a plinth, then the bricks go up. The second project is another museum that we recently finalized by last year in Belgium, in Kortrijk. In this case, we had the opportunity really to transform an historical building. Many other projects are about addition, extension. This is really a special opportunity that we had. It's about to renovation and transformation of a very beautiful old abbey made in between the 15th century and 17th century. This is an image of the existing buildings are the dorm, a very beautiful building, listed building, made in 17th century. And this abbey was transformed in a museum already in the 70s, in the 80s. And it suffered, it's not very visible here, a kind of a little bit aggressive intervention. This intervention really distort the perception of the original abbey. How was the original abbey? In this is a little bit image, but pretty clear. This is during the construction. You can notice that there was a church in the 15th century, other chapel, 17th century, and the dorms. No? So it's essentially the abbey grow up but by addition of very simple pavilion, one after the other in some way. And the intervention in I think it's around the 70s or something, really that was exactly here, really distorted these perceptions. So our proposal was pretty straightforward, very clear. We tried to read in how the abbey grows, no? The addition of sample pavilion, and we just had, with the same logic, in coherence of what already exists, a new pavilion that works again, stealing the element that already exists there. It is just a new simple pavilion that in some way try to be integrated in the place, be very, to be inserted very with a lot of delicacy in this very sensitive context, but at the same time he has its very strong presence. And from this image to the previous one that I show you of the museum in Lausanne, there's no difference for us. It's the same. It's exactly the same methodology of work. It's a site-specific architecture that work with the elements that already exist there. There's no invention, but they are transformed and reorganized in a different way that open new scenario for the possibility. So the intervention, again, we remove part of the intervention, and from one side we made a very surgical intervention, and we had this small pavilion that contained the new city living, a place for cultural debate, exhibition, etc., etc. But the pavilion is located very strategically. Very simple, because it has the capacity to be related with the park. This in the old times, this park belongs to the abbey, but also be related with these two important church, beautiful churches that exist in the city center of the country. So the project really is a small project, but it doesn't end here. The project is really to create a new urban, coherent urban environment. And also the position of this element that allow to have a new public passage and transform the historical courtyard in a new public space. From here you see the relationship between the churches, the park that put together all this new ensemble, the relationship between the new building, the churches, the view when we arrive at the beginning, how you approach from the other side. This building has the same size, exactly the same size of the historical pavilions. We always try to find really the right measure, the right dimension, able to insert the architecture without any friction and in the most natural way. And the position of this pavilion permit, as I told you before, reconfigure the courtyard and transform this private courtyard historically in a new public space. Everything seems very related in some way, no? This is what we intend for working continuity with this area. In this image, you can see the intervention of the historic abbey, in which we try to essentially to reorganize everything. We work with recycled bricks. This was the intervention of the 70s. We made some openings, and this is the starting point that we have found. We have cleaned everything. We try to blend a little bit the new brick walls with the historical one without marking a clear division, but you can understand the intervention, but not that much. And in the building, because of the heterogeneity of different pavilions, has a different places. It's a collection of the different spaces. Inside of the chapel, they put 2 floors. No? So we remove, with a very simple intervention, remove the floor, keep the structure, and transform through a courtyard in a new space for art. And filter the light into the spaces, some intervention, just restoration inside of the dorm. And the new pavilion is just a roof that covers a public space right there. the transition between the two buildings and the interior of this new pavilion, this new city living that is very permeable towards the park. But there is a secret. In order to establish this kind of narrative, above, to find the right insert or the right measure, working continuity with pavilion, we decided to organize the two big gallery for contemporary art in the under the two courtyard in some way. This is the underground level, so we can reduce the volume upstairs. And probably this has been the major intervention in the project, in which really is the secret in order to develop this precise intervention with the historical building. These are the gallery during the construction. The new pavilion made by a brick, but it's not exactly a brick. It's a kind of composite in which the 70% of the material is come from building waste, glass, ceramics, and other stuff, and other things, and they give this kind of materiality, which is really related with the materiality of the surrounding. It's very abstract. It's something that is related with this roof of the cathedrals that are very close by. And you know what? When the photographer went to take the picture, we found again this small element that is a little bit hidden behind the church. And this is something that Alberto and I photographed a lot before to making the project. And suddenly, this is something that we forgot and we rediscovered recently. And if you notice, this small element, the minor history, has already all the elements that we reuse into the building. And this is what is a very important moment for us, because it's the project. It's really to find this small element that give uniqueness and also diversity to the place. It's really a kind of visual statement of our approach towards architecture. Recently, we have won a competition for another fine art museum in Gothenburg in Sweden. This is the existing building, a very big building made for an universal exhibition in 1927, I think, 27, 28. So the building is here, the Fine Art Museum here is at the end of this very long axis that link the new area of the city made for that exhibition with the city center, in which there is the famous municipality by Asplund. And the extension should be located on the back of this very important impositive building. So this area, you can see in the image, it's marked a threshold, very clearly threshold. There is a very formal institutional area at the end of this axis, related with this idea of the 20s, from the classic Norwegian Scandinavian classicism, they organize the theater, the opera, and the fine art museum, a kind of small acropolis on the top of this hill, because there is a hill here. The street go slightly up. But behind of the museum, there is another completely different situation made by small residential houses, much more green, etc., etc. So this building was not very fortunate, let's say like this. It's more a mausoleum than a fine art museum, let's say, or a Beaux-Arts museum. The entry, it's here. There is a platform, very positive, let's say. But when you go to the site, the story changes. No? The dimension is different, and something very beautiful appears. You start to understand that you are on the top of this hill. This is a kind of basaltic hill, and also there is a little bit of nature. So we understood very clearly that the project should be really be a transformation, between the formal area and the more natural area. So we opt for, instead of put face by face the project, we opt for a very delicate intervention, this kind of very horizontal building that extend in some way the geometry that really exist in the historical building, and permit really to understand that this is a natural area. Don't disrupt really with a new big volume this area, and they create this kind of transition. And so it's a kind of small, let's say, border of the historical building, and so the project is there. You clearly understand that the same presence of the historical building has the small houses on the back, and the building filters the transition in some way. But again, some element of this idea of double symmetry, verticality, etc., exists in the historical, are also present into this small new building, which is really not small because it's the same size of the historical one, but its present is really less than half. And why we organize this kind of very elongated building? Because what we wanted to do is to maintain the presence, the protagonism of the historical building, and also highlight the geology. The geology is really what characterizes this place, these big black rocks. So it's really, the project really with this very simple volume has the capacity to highlight the nature that exists there. And this, again, is something very specific for this place. Same brick with this simple opening and some skylight. When you make a project, you have a lot of idea in mind. There are, as I say, these ideas are sometimes related with the history of architecture. We had in mind this wonderful skylight by Leverens in his churches, for example. No, so they are in some way related with this distortion, but at the same time, they again, these elements which are the protagonists are also related with this very minor element of the residential building, these chimneys, that really characterize the nature of this place. No? So there is a relation, this idea of working continuity is something related with the history of architecture, with general idea, but also with the very specificity of this place. And also this axis mark all this, arrive from the city center. And very quickly, the project is as just here in this section, in which we bring the people up until the new courtyard, and this is the new space atelier, etc., etc. The entry under the building, historical building, go up the new courtyard that connect these two, and again this very delicate balance between the new intervention and the historical piece, in which each one has its own presence, but together they create a very coherent ensemble. So these three buildings that I presented are essentially located in a very similar context, let's say like this. Historical, delicate, in essentially European context. But in more recent year, the office also start to work abroad, and we start to facing our, let's say, our approach in context very, very different. No? So in some way, this forces us to amplify a little bit the notion of context. So we are almost finished a house in the Emirates, in Dubai, not in Dubai that you know, but in the outskirts, very close to the desert. How to work in this context for us was a kind of very difficult situation. It's just a big piece of land, almost in the middle of the desert, with no references in some way. We visited with our client the house, this beautiful house of his grandfather in an historical district. And suddenly we started to learn about the abstraction of Arab architecture with the climatic dispositif that they use historically to refresh the interior, the relation with the vegetation, and also the relation with light. In that area, you cannot survive in some way outside. So the create shadow, modulate the light is crucial. So the proposal arrived pretty straightforward. First, just think about a roof. No, very simple, nothing special. No, and then imagine that behind of the roof can exist all the life of the family without going outside in some way. So we start to envision in a form in which the entire life of a family can stay, can be behind of this roof with a series of walls, etc., etc. So inside of this big piece of land, we just organize a square, a very pure form. There's no relationship with the context, with the proximity context, but it's more an ideal form in some way. And we organize this kind of a little bit labyrinthic sequence of walls that permit to the landscape to enter into the house. So there is a crown, let's say, a limit of walls, and this series of interior walls. How is organized the house? In black, the main house is this black area, and this is for guests. And this area, this one, are courtyard, covered courtyard, in which appear water and vegetation to control the climate. The tile exterior and interior area of the house are inside this space. As above that, there is a kind of constellation of skylight, and then so there's no limit between the exterior, the outdoor area, and the interior area. You can just move freely throughout the entire house and make your daily life always under the cover without necessity to create landscape outside. But this is a typical house, living, etc., etc. But this is not important, the upper floor. And in every courtyard, there is a wind catcher that permits to move air and refresh this area towards the water and create a kind of microclimate. The elevation, very abstract, very pure, with the presence of this very imponent wind catcher, and some view in which the house is essentially just creating a kind of interior, let's say, microcosm, very abstract in some way. No? So you discover there is depth. The house is pretty large, and with the view, you can cross diagonally the entire house. And this is amazing. It's more about the experience of move through the entire house than other things. You see the light, and you see the depth, no, that cross the entire spaces, skylight, and this is in the few weeks we will terminate, a few months, let's say. It's really more about to create an experience for living in which the people can move freely into this labyrinthic organization, let's say, and provide really a kind of microcosm you can stay during the entire year. The detail of the skylight, etc., and the front facade. And this has been a kind of very important experience because in some way the contextual relationship is not with the physicality of a place, but it's more about the climate, more about the history of that region. And the last project that I will present to you is a project that hopefully we will start to build very soon. Is for the Ulight Arts in Miami. Ulight Arts is a no-profit foundation dedicated to promote young artists. Essentially, the program is around 20 studios for young artists, an atelier, gallery, a small theater, and etc., etc. So the project is located in the north of Miami, along these train tracks. No? And if you notice, here there is a residential area, but all around this area is a kind of, let's say, a productive area, and the area is very harsh, very, let's say, hard in some way. These are some images of, in fact, this is, the plot is here. So it's full of one-story warehouse, very, let's say, temporary building, etc., etc. How to deal again with this context in some way. And this really forces us, like the project in Dubai, to move towards another directions. No? So first of all, the client asked us to create a community, and a community of artists, but also a community for the neighborhood. The goal of the foundation is to explain to the society the importance of art. So suddenly, these are sketches that we made at the very beginning. The garden. Garden is just an element that permits to create community. The garden with palms, an enclosure, the mark. We didn't know yet what's happened. Step by step, we started to envision it that maybe a central public core can be organized the entire proposal. And there was a very epiphanic moment in which we really realized that what's a studio for an artist? Just a space, just a room, nothing else. Maybe if there's an opening towards north, even better. Maybe if it's a skylight, even better. So starting from, and this is a studio, just a room with a skylight. And starting with this very simple basic element, this is really just a room, we understand that by aggregation of this element, we can create a new place, a new scenario, a new artificial landscape in a very simple way. So we started to think how to aggregate it, how to systematize this one towards the entry until the end, etc., etc. So starting from this simple basic piece, we create a new place. Because for us, and I forgot to mention it, sometimes it's much more important try to create a place than an object. No? This is really an important notion. It's more about the relationship between the different buildings than the object in itself. So this is the new landscape, and it's pretty interesting because there is a kind of dialogue between the downtown and these new, little bit enigmatic buildings. So at the very end, there was a comment that made a professor me in Rome that I like it very much, very much. He told us that, look, in this area in which there's no, let's say, context as you intended, you create your own context in some way. Now, instead of objects, to create a place. So the plan is very simple, several clusters, spaces for artists, and this kind of intricate garden in the middle. The skylight. And at the moment, after when we, during the development of the project, we realized that this small tower can have much more meaning than just be skylight. So we started to understand that this collection of towers can become wind catcher or solar chimneys or water tank and help us to create a bioclimatical system that permit to work, to control the climate in a passive way inside of the building. And this is really important because this element that at the beginning was really part of the program has been transformed in a very technical element, no? And acquire multiple meanings. This is the frontal view, the entry towards this new area, and when you enter, you discover the new, very special place in which the vegetation will help to mitigate the climate, in which you move in between these a little bit sculptural places, but this is a very simple place. So it's absolutely right. We didn't have context, let's say like this. We create our context. It's the inverse strategy that we use in the, let's say, in the European project in some way. But at the end also, this is, let's say, this is nothing else than a warehouse in which we put some tower above. So this very basic architecture that already exists there, this warehouse, nothing, story, simple building, is the same in some way here, no? And again, this idea to work in continuity with the context is still present in some way. The porch that permit to enter into the studio, the typical studio, and the garden. And at the night, the artist can work inside here. So, one place, one architecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I ask Alberto and Fabrizio to come? So first I need to thank you so much for kicking off our spring semester lecture. It's a really incredible opportunity to have you both speaking here. Now, I must ask, since I have the first question, first of all, Alberto, is everything that he says, is it right?
No, he's right. It's just the way. I mean, the fact that every time we split the lectures is because you can keep the pace and give the coherence of the speech better than instead of just trying to overlap ourselves and speaking in different ways. But he's right. I mean, I think Fabrizio and me have been having this conversation since 21 years ago. We always discussed about these concepts that he's talking about today here since we were start working together, because we needed to find our common ground working together. So words for us have been very important in our career. And that's why, well, even when every lecture is different, everything sounds coherent to me, and there's no conflict somehow.
But at the office, we have a very Socratic dialogue.
Yeah.
If the other doesn't agree, essentially he say nothing. So there is just a silence.
Silence is.
Silence is the veto.
After 20 years, when if Alberto proposed something or the contrary say something, Alberto, this is that we are not agree, but we work.
Silence is our red line.
I see. Okay. Oh, very good. Maybe we learned that in our marriages and things like that. I don't think that. So I have to ask. So this week, for many of you who participated in the core colloquium, one thing that really came up, the core colloquium this past Wednesday, we were talking about the laminar systems that are so present in the U.S. building industry. For example, everything is layered in our construction systems here in the States, and these layers are. The layers of the wall have a kind of thinness. Now, all the work that you present has a certain kind of thickness. And I would like to just ask you about that. I mean, obviously, when you're facing now Miami, you will feel our American construction. And so I would like to ask you about that, and actually very seriously, because when Raphael Moneo did his building here for the Wellesley Art Museum, it was actually a really, in some ways, a surprising moment, because the sense of detailing, all of these things, were not present in the American construction industry. And you can see, if you go to Wellesley, you can see where the details have been, simply not standing up to the methods that were developed, that he had developed so clearly abroad. So could you just talk about this? Like, I want to understand the thicknesses and...
I think that in our case, since we started working, we always have been working abroad. So the way we work is shaped by this fact. So we never had somehow a collection of details developed in a closer context with us, or in Barcelona or in Spain, that later we translated to other places. We always have had to adapt our architecture to the places where we were working, and the techniques and the logics and the methods that they used, and I think that that's pretty evident in all our buildings. It's not the same the buildings we did or built in Switzerland and the buildings that we built in London or in Poland. So I think that's because we try to understand it and we try to get profit of it. So we don't impose somehow our methodology in terms of construction to the places where we work, because we have never had somehow that experience or that language in Spain or in Barcelona. Then, of course, I mean, we try to use every place and every technique and technology in the best possible way. In Switzerland, we had the chance to work with this, probably this idea of thickness in a more expressive way, very sophisticated way. I mean, Zurich is just thermal concrete, just one layer, because we had the chance to do it there in Zurich, in Switzerland, or in Chur, layering the concrete in many different ways, prefab, non-prefab. So it's true that for us the material needs to express somehow their qualities, or in Lausanne with the brick. And somehow we have been adapted that to every place. In Poland, the thickness comes from the layering of metallic structures, because in Szczecin they had the tradition of the shipyards and people with that knowledge. So we're using it in a different way. And so I would say that we just try to be specific to when building, not just when thinking about the site. And that's why every building is different, every case is different.
So in addition to that, I would say that, is it true that there is an interest to work with mass, with gravity, with density, and this is not very, I don't know, maybe contemporary architecture is more about transparency, lightness, and these kind of things. But since we started, if you pass through all our building, there is always this desire to make the building root and feel the gravity of the materials in some way. Then the techniques change in every different project. No?
Well, probably because you showed us specifically concrete and brick and these kinds of heavy materials. It has the kind of aesthetic presence of the projects. It does have a kind of heaviness, and I'm just curious if you were not able to use those materials specifically, no brick, no concrete, what would you do? I'm envious, first of all, let's be honest. I love the fact that you're working with those materials, because of course they have a kind of endurance, robustness. But if you were not allowed, I really would love to know.
We should present to you the work that we are doing for the Art Institute in Chicago, for example.
The one that's under NDA that I asked for.
And that, unfortunately, but unfortunately we cannot. It's very confidential. We cannot present anything, as I told. But for example, in this is a kind of very, let's say, big project and complex project. We started to work there more than 8 years ago, and probably next year we will start the construction of the one main extension. There we facing this, let's say, this challenge, to be involved in the industry here, work with steel structure, not concrete structure. We are working with glass. We are working with material that are not very, let's say, part of our background, But for example, in that project also, our approach, the concept approach is very similar to that one, even if the scale is completely different, even if facing other technological conditions in some way.
And then, well, I think all our projects are able to support different material approaches. I mean, for example, we have Ulight, the project that we are hoping to break ground this year, is a project that has suffered different, let's say,
Value engineering
processes. And for example, now this building is not about concrete; it's about concrete blocks and render. But the concept of it's able to deal with that. I mean, we always look for something that can survive even the material changes, even if the technique is not so sophisticated as in Switzerland, even if the people who build it doesn't have the experience to you need to understand that, but the building needs to survive. The idea needs to survive. So we always struggle to get at that moment where we internally think, okay, what happens if this is not concrete? But it's going to be fine.
I mean, with the Ulight project in particular, it seemed to me that you were referencing some of the adjacent buildings, which were storage buildings and, let's say, low-value buildings. But it's interesting because even if that project were to turn into that kind of construction system, to me, the strength of the strategy is there, and it would actually hold up just as well, perhaps even more in a more interesting tension if it wasn't a material that we associate with that kind of heaviness. I mean, I think that's pretty. To me, that would be very interesting, actually.
Exactly. You know, the project in Miami. So, if let's say if the proposal it's very well articulated, it supports this changing. It's not about really a material in itself. It's the client say to us, Alberto or Fabrizio, we have to work with the local vernacular. So because local vernacular in Miami is just it's plaster.
Glass is the local vernacular in Miami.
But in some way, I think in this specific case. I would say that the project will support it because it's really about a strategy, how to create community, how to create a garden, and even if the construction at the end it's let's say more poor in some way, as we hope it will have the same strength and the same strength. Is also related with what exists around. It's a very simple building that has a very simple building, but has a strong capacity to create public space in some way.
I'd like to open it up to the floor because there are a lot of people here I can see that would like to ask questions. And we have some runners with microphone.
Hi, Alberto. Hi, Fabrizio. Nice to see you both again. Thank you for the lecture. Fabrizio, I was a bit curious to hear you, in a way, reduce Ulight at the end to, quote, a warehouse, especially because you described warehouses as impermanent, in a way, temporary, and you kicked off the lecture with, what was it, a permanence and transformation. So I was wondering if you could speak more to how your architecture is about placemaking and maybe the space between buildings and how you frame those social interactions. Thank you.
Look, we are really interested in the space in between building, in this interstitial space. So the very first image that I presented of our very first building, the Ribera del Duero, I didn't have time today to present it. But it's really just about to create a frame to this belvedere. And it creates this very beautiful relationship in which you create between buildings that has the capacity to create a place, not only the object, not in this. And we are really interested in this idea. It appears there. The strategy, the urban strategy in Lausanne is similar in some way. In Miami is very evident. So there are many projects in which, for sure, we have the possibility. We really wanted to create more interesting in the creating a place than an object. For sure, then this depends case by case. No, the museum in Chur is this small building that really is a kind of an alter ego of the pre-existing building. Is a very objectual, no? Because in some way the rest of the building was already there. It was necessary to fragment it, no? So I think it's this idea to create interstitial space. The project, really, the form of the project arrive is always a result of a reflection about how to organize the public area in all the project. And in Miami, you know, so the Miami for us has been a really important project, because in which the strategy, not the strategy, this idea to work in continuity with something has shifted in some way, in a little bit. It's still there, but it works in a different way, no? Because of the context, because this different reality in some way. And I guess it makes it also more articulated, the proposal. I like the fact that the building could be in the future just a symbol, almost anonymous building, no? But when you discover and you enter, suddenly there is something there with very simple things, just rooms, skylight, or the other elements, no? And to achieve special public space with very simple things, I think is something important.
Oliver, do you want?
Thanks for a wonderful lecture. I wanted to ask you about your project in London, in the Greenwich Design District, where you were asked to kind of take part in this almost like an architectural zoo of young architects. And also the brief of designing a pair of buildings, where your context is the kind of Millennium Dome, the Foreign Office Art School, Boris Johnson's cable car, this kind of really chaotic and strange parts of London. How did you approach that brief, and what was it like working with that developer?
Yeah. It was a kind of an experiment for all of us. I mean, well, just to maybe for the audience to explain this project. I mean, a private client invited 8 architects to design a couple of buildings in a new district in Greenwich in London. During the process, I mean, none of us knew what was developing the other architect. So nobody knew somehow the result, or we didn't have the opportunity to talk with our architects to understand what we literally didn't know what was going on the 6A plots in front of us. So we started working in a probably similar way than in Dubai, for example. I mean, trying to get somehow what's important, what's the essence of, not the place, because the place would change completely, but I mean, what means an atelier or an artist's studio in London for us? Which are the elements that we could use? I mean, the windows, probably for us, coming from abroad, the idea of this industrial window that gets light into the buildings, and how to use probably the strength of using two, because we had to design 2 buildings, the strength of 2 buildings talking to each other, with a similar approach, different materiality, and trying to improve both of them, I mean, by looking to each other and by finding some synergy between both of them. The experience, the result, I mean, you know, it's a kind of zoo, as you said. I mean, each animal with its different characteristics, and some of them better than others. I think the success of that area is going to be probably not because of the buildings, but because of the activity that they can provoke. And that was the main value of this district. Not sure how successful it's going to be, because, well, they are still dealing with or struggling with the rents and with the way of occupying them. But something I think it's fine. It's I mean, the idea, the density that they provoke, the buildings, the somehow the different scale of spaces that they provoke within Greenwich, which is a quite hard, piece of land somehow. And that's the value of the master plan. The architecture in itself, there are better buildings than others, but the master plan, I think and the intention behind it, I think it's a good intention. But it was an experiment for the client, for us, for the developer. Of course, was an experiment. Yeah.
And entirely made during the pandemic time. That has had more complexity. This has been really a kind of experiment, very, very different from all the other projects that we have made in this case.
We made all our, well, not all of them, but during the work, we did it remotely, the work on site, basically, with a camera. We were just always asking for pictures, videos, and so it was really, really an experiment for all of us. And in our case, it was our first time in London or in United Kingdom, which is a different world compared to Spain or compared to Switzerland. So it was a good, something interesting in our practice is that we are not a huge practice and we don't have so many works, but each one, it's unique because it happens always in a place that we don't know, with techniques and with cultural approaches completely different to our projects. And that forces us somehow to reinvent ourselves constantly. And this is what happened in London. And that experience helped us when moving to Dubai, probably. This idea of working in a context that is going to change completely. Yeah.
Something tells me, Oliver, that you have something else to say. Are you leading the witness? It's a longer conversation. Okay, next.
Thank you so much for the talk. I just really enjoyed it very much. Sometimes one sees one wants to see, but it seemed to me, both in the work and the way in which you discussed it, that there's a strong presence of Aldo Rossi, the very early Aldo Rossi, and his attention to type and to urban space, not the late Rossi. And so that's like part one of the question, if I'm just seeing what I want to see, or is that presence there? And I guess the second part would be, because Rossi changes so much, but you showed us early work and more recent work, and it seems to be, there's a very strong continuity. Has your work changed in a way that perhaps we are not seeing throughout the years? Thank you.
Because I'm in the Italian, maybe the answer for me.
No, perché è italiano, perché
He has to answer
Rossi è
about
molto forse all'Italia e all'Espagna, no?
No, I think you touched on a very important. Look, this morning I registered a video because on Monday there is a very important ceremony in Venice, at my old school, because they celebrate the 100 year of the university, and I prepared this video, and in which the other colleagues and professors there asking me about what was the importance of the my experience, my let's say studies there in Venice, and I said that I studied there. This has been my university. I arrived exactly when the year that I had the studio with Rossi. Unfortunately he died, so I didn't have the opportunity to work directly with him. But all what I've learned in Venice school is still part of my background, and probably you can have a reflect of what happens there. And this idea of relationship with the context, that this notion of the context for an Italian is very, very important, even too much arrive from there. and we try to transform it not in just an academical notion, but to make this notion, to interpret it in a more open way, in some way, less academical, more free. What's the context? The context, it's not just a physical things, but it's more a mental things. In many cases, part of, for us, it doesn't matter what are the element of this context, no, or the greater reality. So this let's say this thought is what I learned, and it continues to be part of the practice. For sure, when we started, so I grew up in Italy, and my academical studies have been there, but the practice has been always in Spain, and I think this had, I would say, a little bit of pragmatism to the firm, no, in some way. And yeah.
And answering your second part of the question, I don't think our work or our way of work has changed substantially since we started working together. I think the fundamentals, they are always the same, I think. And of course, I mean, we try to make it better in every opportunity that we have, but we use always the same. We come back always to the same concepts. The idea of what means public, trying to get the essence of the places, trying to solve things in two moves instead of three, if we are able to find those moves. Trying to propose simplicity not as a way to be minimalist, but this is a way that we understand the world. I mean, we don't like to add complexity to the places where we work. We try to improve them, finding the elements that help us to simplify what's going around us. But because that's the way we are, not because that's what we are looking for. I think at the end, I think our projects, they talk about the sites, but mostly they talk about us. And if, when we're looking at the buildings, we as architects, as Fabrizio and me, I think we design for ourselves first. And that's why I think that our work didn't change much, or the way we work didn't change much since we started together.
Could I ask a follow-up question, because you're now engaging in this subject matter of authorship and your authorship on these projects. If I told you that last semester I saw on the trays your Ullite project in somebody else's hands, what would you think of that? I'm just curious to ask you, because actually a lot of people are looking at your work, and especially the images that you're making, also the sketches, of course. And what do you think of that? If you saw that there was that basically that partie strategy, the wind catcher, this kind of minaret, that form making is so strong, and I would love to hear what you're thinking about this, because actually the visual imagery is very, very pronounced, and it's very identifiable. I always know when I'm looking at one of your images. So I thought it was interesting that on the tray, I'm walking down, I thought it was yours, but it was a student's using your work. And of course, imitation is the best flattery and all of that. So, and we have to learn by also, but I really would like to understand what you think about this. When you say the work is us, that's a very profound, actually, idea. So,
well, I would say that the first reaction is always, it always bothers you probably when you see something too similar. Not in a professional way. I mean, when you see professionally something too similar, the first reaction is always saying, "Whoa." But being honest, I mean, we all have references. We all have a past, and we all need to look after us and to think about what can be useful to do your best in the places where you work. So I think that to me, it's not that bothers me at all at the end, because I think that sometimes probably we have done the same with our architects. And the problem is that nowadays everything is so exposed, everything is so literally so easy to get from here and there, and just sampling something in your project that sometimes it's too evident, you know? And that's a problem. But I mean, I can't personally be bothered by somebody doing something similar to what we do, because probably we have done the same with our architects, so I can't complain.
And maybe, but if we enlarge a little bit the questions about the authorship, no? So let's say, since we started, we really we have never been interested in to create our own vocabulary in some way. But through the years, what is true is that we have tried to let's say, elaborate a kind of methodology of work that is very similar throughout all the project. No, so there's no intention to create let's say, a vocabulary, a language in some way, no, in which you can recognize the building. It's really much more about the strategy and the methodology towards certain context or certain reality that we are really interested to keep in all the project. No, so conceptually, there's no very different towards all these different proposals. The very first that we made in ROA, or the most recent one. No, so we are really interested to discover which are the way of work in the context that permit reflect about public space, about this, all the things that we have seen. So if some student look at us, I will hope really understand not only the form of building, this is just the result, but really what's behind, why this building is like this in that specific context, what's the methodology that is at the base, what you want to achieve. No, and if the student learn that, it's a good opportunity for him.
Okay, one more question. Chris? Sorry. Chris?
Thank you so much for the very interesting lecture. And I want to return to the back to the question of Rossi, because the ghost of Rossi is all over your work and even the title of your project. And in your title of your project, you use the word permanence and transformation. In a way, if you paraphrase Rossi's urban artifact, it says the urban artifact has two qualities: the quality of being permanent and propelling, right? And therefore, we see Rossi goes back to history, look at the historical city as a source of renewing architecture. Now I want to reach to the question of Rossi, because Rossi uses history and context precisely to brush up in his time against the orthodoxy of architectural modernism and the universalism of the tabula rasa and international style. So one could say that context and history for Rossi was an intellectually difficult project. It was a project that he struggled with precisely because he was brushing up against modernism. Now, in today's context, we see that history and context is almost a de facto arena that architects revert to, precisely, let's say, coming from London, coming from the UK. Context and history is always used as an excuse to lubricate the planning process, because it makes architecture that fits nicely into the context. So I wonder, when you conjure up the name or the title, permanence and transformation, what is the intellectual struggle that you find in the work? And I mean this in a really positive way, right? What do you think is the biggest struggle in your work?
Let's see, how can I articulate the answer? I think that how to say, invention or by itself, no? In architecture, maybe it's difficult in some way. And I think our work really tried to reject this generic idea that an architecture can stay everywhere with the same form or same strategies, but it's really about to emphasize the diversity, the uniqueness of the place. I don't know how to explain better this idea. I think we are a little bit suffering nowadays a kind of homogenization, let's say, of the city in some way. And we try to work really in the opposite way. Really rely the building with the differences, the uniqueness of the different places. This is, I don't know how to articulate it maybe better this concept, but it's not just to. I think there are. You can always interpret a context in a continuous different way, and the result can be continuous different architecture, really a part of your personal interpretation that give meaning to that specific things, and I think we really want to create this kind of ambientalist, if I use a work from Ernesto Nathan Roger, for some ambientalism architecture, in which you really feel that these belong to a place, nothing else, I would say.
I think just trying to be accurate with your question, I think that the struggle is really to find that midpoint between permanence and transformation. I mean, we don't use the context just as an excuse to build something, or just because, as using the word you used before, to lubricate somehow the project and justify it. I think that we try to understand the context from many different points of views, some of them non-evident. When we achieve something that is non-evident, we think, probably we feel even better, and then from that point start composing a narrative able to take the project beyond that point and transform the place with that small tool that sometimes is the physical context, sometimes is the atmosphere, sometimes is, and that's something that we have been learned over the past years, and so we don't use history in capital letters as a tool, because sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's about just the material. Sometimes it's about the gesture. Sometimes it's about something that you find out in a place that helps you to think about the right thing to do in that specific place. Try to be unique and try to discover somehow the strength of the place. So where is that moment? What that happens? Because sometimes that doesn't happen. I mean, sometimes we are conscious that we didn't get it. And that's the difficulty, because then you tend to be too contextualist, probably. Then you tend to be too autonomous, probably, and that's when the project fails. And that's the risk, I think, in this approach to architecture.
And I think another point is that it's very difficult to find this balance that Alberto mentioned. No, your architecture should be absolutely precise. No, if it is, let's say, just in a simple word, too contextualist, maybe it means nothing. If your architecture is too auto-referential, for us also doesn't mean nothing. There is a beautiful moment, at least this is our interpretation, no? In which you feel that the building it's able to stay in balance between these very opposite concept, no? Belong to a place and go away from that place. And this is sometimes there are the most buildings that are in line, they define this balance. Some other are more less clear on that, no? But we really work in continuous ambivalence between these two elements. And in fact, also another point, I think it's interesting, that years ago we wrote a short text in which we explained that sometimes what was the most important thing for us was to find the right tone. When I say the right tone, sometimes the architecture should be impositive, should colonize it, should be more, I don't know, more auto-referential. The case of the Philharmonic in Szczecin, for example, in which it's part of renovation of the entire area, no, it should really, let's say, be the starting point for something bigger in some way. It should be very, let's say, should shout, no? And in some other project, for example, there is a small school that we have made in the northern of Italy, in which the project is anonymous, absolutely anonymous. You cannot recognize it. It just complete is in the city center of a beautiful small town, in which was not necessary to touch nothing. So in that context, the architecture is really silent, anonymous, no? So for this reason, I say that it's really important to modulate the architecture in relationship of the concepts. Is not a very, let's say, I would say there's no theoretical approach behind that. It's more about really, I don't know, for us, find how to modulate your voice, no, in a speech. The same with architecture. Sometimes you just speak slow, and sometimes you shout.
The work shows this kind of intuitive sensibility. So I wanted to thank you very much for being, again, our first lecture of the semester. Thank you.
Thank you.
Barozzi Veiga.
Thank you.